All right, I want to talk about the creed of the early Asharis, and Salafis often try to differentiate between them and the later ones, right? So one thing I try to do in my book is show the resemblance between them, right? Because of course it's in their best interest, the Salafis, to try to distinguish both generations of Asharis. In reality, you do find a lot of similarity between them. I'm going to start with Abu Bakr al Baqilani. He's one of the most famous of the early Asharis. I believe he's a student of Abu Hassan Ashari. All right, so he studied under some students, two students of Abu Hassan Ashari. All right, so well, I guess I want to start with just I sometimes I like to throw Ibn Taymiyyah around just because Salafis, they see his word as almost as gospel. So Ibn Taymiyyah did say about him in Majmu' Fatawa that he's the best of the mutakallims. There's none like him among them before or after him. And I know exactly what he means. When you read Abu Bakr al-Baqilani's content, you really feel like his level of logical reasoning is pretty high compared to others. Like he was really one of the best. Anyways, I'm just gonna go into some of the points he says in Creed to show that his creed is obviously resembles the Ashari Creed, but I'm gonna explain everything. All right. So he wrote two major books, Kitab al Tamhid and Al Isnaf. Right now, and this is Al Isnaf, page 23. I just want to go into the attributes. Right. This is important. So he says his hands are outstretched. Right. He mentions hands, and I believe he mentions face. Right. Their face of your Lord will remain. Now, what he says here is they are neither limbs nor possessing an image and nor a body. And you have to understand that point there. That's really important. Because the Salafis don't understand what he's doing here. He's really denying the meaning. And I'm gonna prove this, by the way. Don't worry. We're gonna prove that when he denies that they are limbs, image, body, he is denying that it is a meaning. And we're gonna prove that. So let's be patient. Now he goes another one running through our eyes. And eyes are not in the sense of the senses and does not resemble the limbs and the genuses, right? So once again, denying the meaning, and we'll prove that because they'll say, "Oh, that's the case." Now here's another one, istiwa, right? There's no contact or modality nor adjacency, right? Now what we then we could go to another book, Kitab al Tamhid, where he says this is where he really denies material concepts for Allah, right? If you want to know in the matter of composition, form, and genus, then there is no form or genus, and we will tell you about him, right? Whereas a question about location is not ascribable to him, so right, he denies where, locality. You could keep going. On page 301, he is on his throne, and not in the meaning of the body being adjacent to and in proximity to, right? He's greatly above that. And your question about this necessitates that he was in a time that was not before eternity, because when is a question about eternity, right? We'll keep going. And this is important as well. He says in page 194, he denies that he's a body, denies had, which is the limit, right? And this is another one, right? He also talks about the face again, meaning the essence, right? Meaning himself, right? So he does take a metaphor for it, or he doesn't take the literal meaning in that context. And this is important, right? Uh, page 12, I think it's the same book. No, we're going back to El Isnaf here. It does say, look, he's not restricted to directions, and moving, standing. This is all typical kalam, right? Concepts. He denies location. So you can see they're definitely similar to the only difference between this, right? He denies space, image, right? This is the same thing as the Asharis. They always denied this. So the idea that they're so different, the early and later Asharis, at least in this particular category, there is no difference, right? And you could keep going. Essentially, he keeps on denying that God is essentially made of matter. That's really the point. Direction, right? The important thing I want to note, though, is that he affirms, right, the attributes, but he doesn't. But we need to understand how he's affirming, and I'm going to prove this little by little, okay? First, I want to start here, right? This is from Ibn Hajar al Asqalani's Fath al Bari, volume 13, page 394. He says 25 possible meanings of hand, right? The first is a limb. And you have to understand this is important because he's essentially saying that that's one of the meanings. So if you deny that it's a limb, are you denying the meaning? And we're going to try to understand that now, and I'm going to try to prove it to you. All right, so let's look at this is a early Hanbali scholar, I think 4th century after Hijrah. Qadi Abu Yala, he was the most important Hanbali of his time period. And he says in his book about, I believe it's called Ibtal al-Ta'wil, which means denying metaphorical interpretation. Here's what he says. Another evidence for invalidation of interpretation is that Abu Hasan Ashari and his companions, such as Abu Bakr al Baqilani, Abu Bakr bin Furak, and these others, have affirmed the attributes that they did not comprehend their meanings, did not carry them according to language requirements, such as the face, the hands, and the eye. They did not say the face, the whole essence, and the hands as two blessings, right? But essentially what he's saying is that they did not give it a meaning, right? And he even mentions Baqilani and Ashari, right? So the idea is that they have a different, they're performing Tafweedh, and that's what he justifies. This whole book is this scholar, Qadi Abu Yala, trying to justify Tafweedh, right? And so when he's using them as an example of that, you can assume that that's what he meant, is that they affirmed the same type of Tafweedh that he affirmed. And we can find what he said himself. Why don't I just find it real quick? It's because we affirm the hadith as it came, right? We did not comprehend its meaning. Now, there's a better one, right? For example, here it is, and it sounds exactly like, this is a really important quote here. I know that it is not impossible to carry this hadith on its zahir, right? But we did not affirm a foot, a wounded thigh, or a limb. Rather, affirm that as an attribute, as we affirmed the self, the face, the hands. We would not affirm that he put his foot in contact. You understand? So he's saying we did not affirm it as a limb. We do not comprehend its meaning, right? And that's important. When he says we take the apparent, the zahir, it doesn't actually mean that we take the apparent meaning, right? You could take the zahir, meaning the outward, right? The wording. That's what they mean. We take the wording, but we don't explain it. We don't say what it means. We just affirm it as an attribute. We do not define the meaning of a hand as a limb. You understand? Now, there's a quote from, and I have it in my book, from Bin Baz and Salih al-Fawzan, where I'll just show you guys because the point is, you could see he considers his position to be in line with the early Asharis, who did not define the meaning. Baqilani said he has hands, but we do not say that they are limbs. And you look at all the early Asharis, they all have the same thing, right? And I went over a few of them. Let's see, right? For example, Al-Khattabi, Bayhaqi, they all do this, right? They deny the meaning, right? Now let's keep going. So this is the quote I was talking about with Bin Baz. So Bin Baz and Salih al-Fawzan wrote a commentary over At-Tahawi's creed. Now here's what Tahawi says. He says he's beyond having limits, ends, parts, limbs, and instruments. Now what they say is, he says, if he means created limits, but I want to find the one where he denies the limbs. That's the one I'm looking for. This is important. The parts, the limbs, and the instruments, right? This is his commentary over it. He says this is ambiguous and very general. If what is meant by the parts, the limbs, and instruments are subjective attributes of his essence, such as the face, the hands, then these are reality, basically what he means, and their negation is false, right? That tells you what they really mean by limbs, right? The fact that he considers negating that Allah has limbs to be false, right? And if he means to negate the parts that are resembling to the limbs of the creatures, right? But essentially, he has an issue with him denying that Allah has limbs and parts because he believes that he, obviously in his mind, face, the hands, and all of that are limbs, right? Except they're not created. is what they're essentially saying. And you find the same thing from Bin Baz. We could keep going. Let's go to Bin Baz. He has the same Tahawi Creed commentary, and he says, let's find it. This is about the limits. Here it is. As for the limits, what is meant is that free from similarities with creatures, right? Um, this one's not as bad, actually. Let me see. Yeah, I mean, this one is nowhere near as explicit, where it seems like he's implying that denying the limbs is a bad thing. But he does sort of criticize it, right? He does. He actually tries to defend Al Tahawi, which is interesting, right? The fact that he's trying to defend him shows you that he might see a mild issue with outright denying these uh, descriptions, right? Uh, yeah, but you can see the Salih al Fawzan one was much worse, where he essentially says that if you're denying that, meaning the hands and the face, then you know that's incorrect, and that shows you that they see that as somewhat resembling their own position. So you can understand that when we use the word hand and we don't give it a meaning, then it's like a type of tafweed, right? The Salafis don't outright give it a meaning either, but they don't really answer that question. They say, "Oh, we affirm the meaning." Okay, but which meaning? But they never answer that question. That's the problem. But as you can see from Ascalani's book, there's 25 possible meanings to the word hand. So which one do you affirm, right? Um, if you do affirm a meaning, then surely you can define it for us. But then they start saying, "Oh, that's the kayf," but that's not what we mean at all. But anyways, that's it.